When considering government, I'll consider it first from its most basic levels, the way it begins in tribes. And the common ruling of tribes is through a council of elders. For in our primitive times, when the elements were harsh and technology was little and the struggles of life were harsh, just living old enough to be an elder gave some validity to your advice. So a council of elders ruling over the cause of the people was just a practical way for advice to come down into a tribe. But as tribes grow bigger towards nations, this leadership selection becomes more difficult, and the people that rose to power in this typically did so from elders, but also with signs and wonders. Now, these signs and wonders could be through healings, or through visions, or through some kind of innovation. These would be shamanistic types of led communities, groups, or signs and wonders on the battlefield, which would be more of a military type of rule. Well, as nations formed, there had leaders within most nations, including both people who had performed healings or told of their visions and prophecies, and signs and wonders on the battlefield, because battles were happening between nations all the time. Well, one group of people that we have documentation of their rise as a nation and their form of government and how it came about is the people of Israel and Moses, who became leader through signs and wonders, both those he gave to the Pharisees and also signs and wonders that happened while they were in the wilderness after leaving out of Egypt. So Moses ruled over the people by judging over the people. People would bring their cause to Moses to be judged. And he gave the people the law of the Ten Commandments that he brought down from a mountaintop that would receive from God. But as he sat in judgment, hearing more and more cases, he found that more and more rulings needed to be put in place, so less cases needed to be brought before him if there was already a rule in place to dictate who was right and who was wrong in that matter. And ultimately, a great number of rules came to be in place. And these rules, being as this was both the official government and the church, these were rules. The church and state was the same thing, and these rules applied across the board. And these rules included dietary restrictions, sexual conduct rules, dress codes, rules even to building codes. So all sorts of rules put in place in essence, for the reported purpose of helping the people and to live cooperatively together and get along and have a guidance that they could all agree to. So this type of ruling continued for a very long time, and to some degree continues to this day. But it changed over time because when Samuel came to rule, Samuel was ruling as a judge over the people the same way Moses had, and he had been raised within the church his whole entire life. But once he was judge, and in his older years, becoming an elder, he had appointed his sons to be judges also, and they were taking bribes. Also, the people of Israel were being challenged by outside entities and other nations, so they really needed leadership on the battlefield. And Samuel had some victories on the battle. There were some victories on the battlefield under Samuel, and some defeats on the battlefield under Samuel. But also with the corruption of his sons taking bribes, the people went to Samuel and they said, "We want you to appoint us a king to rule over us." For what they were really asking for, they said in the manner of the way other nations are ruled. What they were really asking for was a military type of leader, not to be ruled so much because they didn't consider it a spiritual matter, but a test actually for the battlefield. So pick someone who could rule the battlefield to be their leader. So he, as troubled as he was by this, he talked to God, and God said, appoint them a king like they asked for. So he said, this shall be now this is reading directly from the King James Version, book of Samuel, the first book of Samuel. Samuel says, This shall be the king that shall reign over you. He will take your sons and appoint them for himself, for his chariots, and to be his horsemen, and some shall run before his chariots. And he will appoint him captains over thousands, and captains over 50, and he will set them to ear his ground, and to reap his harvest, and to make his instruments of war, and instruments of chariots. And he will take your daughters to be confectionaries, and to be cooks, and to be bakers. And he will take your fields, and your vineyards, and your olive yards, and the best of them, and give them to his servants. And he will take 1/10 of your seed, and of your vineyards, and give to his officers and his servants. And he will take your maidservants, your men servants, and your maidservants, and your goodliest young men, and your asses, and put them to his work. And he will take 1/10 of your sheep, and ye shall be his servants. Well, that's what Samuel predicted. But nonetheless, he did as they asked, and he appointed Saul to be king. Well, Saul went out to battle with Israel and was victorious, and there was a great celebration. So Saul became very accepted as the new king and ruler over the people. And during that celebration, in what could be seen something of a farewell speech, Saul stated, basically in a manner sort of like, let somebody speak now or forever hold their peace. He said, I ask anybody to state any case where I ever took your lands, took your men servants, took your asses, took your lands, and put them to my use. Meaning that he had been able to rule over the people in the former type of government, had ruled over the people without requiring all these things of the people. Now, in this, let's remember that there is a third party. We're talking about the people and the government, and the struggle between the people and the government. But there is a third party involved even in this, and that is the press. In this case, the press is the Holy Bible, because it basically sets in judgment over the people and over Samuel and over his sons and all that. So it is a very key player in all this. Now, from this case of what happened with Samuel, we don't have a Fox News and a CNN News. You got one account and that account, but there seems to be some evidence that it was a sort of independent type of press, because it points out that the people that Samuel's prophecies were coming true, and Samuel had not let the people down, but it states that his sons had. So it's for Samuel, but it's not 100% for his cause, and it's for the people, but not 100%. So it becomes a key player in its stance, especially since it was officially the Word of God. So the people putting it to print were the press, just the same way that Samuel had to hold himself accountable with the authority being God. The writers, the press at that time also were holding their accountability to be seen before God and to be judged by God. So that is one government, the way it rose from all the way from times of no government whatsoever up to kings, and the prediction from what would happen after a king was appointed. Now, many more centuries go by, and now I'll talk about the challenge of establishing a government here in the United States. Now, mind you, all of these all this information, and especially because this book was the most read book back then too, they had examples, and this was part of it. But more importantly to them at the time was they were coming out of what they felt to be a sort of a tyrannical rule. So when they established their government, the people demanded of the authors of the government that it be not totalitarian in any way whatsoever. So the initial struggle that arises between setting up a government becomes this: the struggle between authoritarian and libertarian. The libertarian is what rights the people maintain to themselves, their time, and their possessions, and their actions. And authoritarian is what powers the government shall have to control society. Now, if it goes too far past the extremes of what the government would allow here in America, that was totalitarianism, and that was a totalitarian government was exactly what the people didn't want. Now, no government whatsoever would be anarchy. Now, both totalitarian and anarchy typically only last for so long. because totalitarian governments typically fall to the people because the people revolt. In anarchy, with no government at all, the first governments that arise are often bands of gangs that take control through brute force, and there's nobody to defend the people against them. So when America was perceiving that it needed some sort of government to establish itself. Now let's think about what the purpose of having this government is the people within the agreed upon nation that are willing to participate within a nation want to be able to move about and do about their business and live their lives within those boundaries of that nation under some sort of protection from that nation. And as we've already spoke about, as Samuel already spoke about, that doesn't come for free, it comes at a cost. And so in this nation, it was decided a certain amount of land was going to have to be given up to at least build a building to be the capital. And then as the government grew, now here comes the next thing. The more you expect from your government, the more you're going to have to be willing to part with it. If you want the government to be in charge of the roads, well, now you have to understand that that's going to cost money, so a certain amount of taxation for that, and also the people demand the roads. If you want the government to provide schooling, then you're going to have to accept the fact that you're going to have to pay for the teachers, and you're going to have to the building of the schools. All these services that the government provides, that the more you want from the government, the more you have to understand that it's going to cost something along the way. So although the first division is between authoritarian and libertarian, then comes the second division between a left wing and a right wing, because both sides, left wing and right wing, want some liberties and some authority. But so a two-party platform that exists in the United States as the primary form of voting that takes place is basically, you could think of it sort of like as a cable package. Each one of them, you choose which rights are the ones that you most want to protect and which authorities you most want the government to have. So that gives this, which is basically the base of a government. Outside of it would be the extremist, that you're anarchists, you're totalitarians, but within the right wing and left wing, other parties can come into account. Well, they could be through private businesses that want to have it to dictate, because just as the sons of Samuel were bribed, the leaders could be bribed by lobbyists or by powerful commercial entities wanting to operate within a nation. So this country set up its foundation on life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. So it chose to be, after coming out of a government that had assumed what the people of this country felt as too much authority, it chose to be very libertarian on its basics, for life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness as guaranteed rights, as the very founding stone. Now, mind you, this came at a time when many people did not have that already. There were slaves in this country. So it was already contradictory to the way people were living in the nation. So it was a challenge not only to the future to maintain it, but to that present time to achieve it. But it at least gave people a solid stone of government declared decree that they could defer back to. Martin Luther King could defer back to it, and anybody who was really wanting to bring liberty to their cause. And so we still have that. But in 1789, much more was added, because the people, even with 13 years having passed since independence was declared, still the cause was to make sure that the government didn't have too much power. So the Bill of Rights came into effect, and that guaranteed freedom of speech, freedom of religion, and also it also forbade against establishment of an official religion in the United States. That because it was seeing the challenge of the government over the causes of authoritarian and libertarian, where people were wanting to implement moral code as codes of life in opposition to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, where Under life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, as long as it doesn't interfere with somebody else's life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, under the foundation of the country, you should be able to do it. But there still has to be a certain amount of government to protect the innocent, to protect the elderly, and to protect children, because they aren't always able to make their own decisions. So some sort of moral code regarding children and elderly and the care of people that cannot make their own decisions has to be put in place. But it was the intention for it to stay somewhat minimal. However, with time, what rises from the base of the government grows into the pyramid of government. For as at the base are the citizenry, and these reach all the way out to the people on the extreme, the farthest radical people that are still willing to participate within the government. They might want the rules changed, but they're still willing to work within the government to have them be changed rather than trying to exercise some sort of revolt against the government. So everybody inside the base of the citizenry are part of the nation and they contribute up to it. Now, the people who are in public service, that's going to be a more narrow group of people, because they're not only agreeing to participate in it, but they're also actively partaking in the government itself. So your more radical people would not be the people that you would have in public service, because if they don't agree with the rules, then they're probably not going to carry them out the way the people have agreed that they be carried out. Above that is military service and the police, who exercise power even over public servants. And then above that you have local and state government, then federal government, all the way up to the top of the pyramid, which is in the United States, the chief executive office, where it's one man that you can look to over the office. He doesn't, through the checks and balance, he still does not have totalitarian control, but he is the one so ideally, at the very top of this foundation of the citizenry would be a leader who is somewhat central, because he is to be the representative of all the people. If he's too far to the left or too far to the right, then it's hard for the people to agree to his ruling very much. So you have that as a foundation, and that's the way this government was set up and with the intention to be carried out. But let's remember what we stated earlier about the press, because this comes into play very much, because press is sort of an archaic word where media, because it was, at the time, the media was the written word, and the way it was distributed was through the press at the time that the Constitution was written. So when they talk about freedom of the press, that basically is talking about media, because the media of the press at that time was print. But now the media of the press is often videos or what's in digital form rather than pressed out into a book. So the media is a very key player. So now let's consider social media, where social media gave, at first look, it appears the most libertarian, the power to the people sort of concept you could imagine, because now the concept that everybody's opinions could be exchanged in a public forum on even grounds was a revolutionary state where all people could look at all sides, and not only within their own country, but far-reaching peoples, and hear other people's stories and see things through their viewpoints, and then decide what they chose to view for themselves. So a great, wonderful advancement it was, and moreover, people agreed to participate in the platforms and sort of form. So as Facebook arose and became something big, and MySpace before that, and Facebook and Instagram and YouTube and TikTok and all your major social media platforms, people agree to participate in it. But it's not a government, they don't have a constitution like the United States does. There's no guarantee to your free speech on this platform. There's no guarantee to your press. And then this idea that we have through the moderation of these platforms, theoretically shadow banning. Well, if it's a shadow ban, it means that the person doesn't necessarily understand. It's never been expressed to them that their videos are being blocked or their posts aren't being distributed as widely as they might be. Sometimes you may be given notification of this, and sometimes you may have a post, you may be told that it's inappropriate and told why it's inappropriate. You might have the right to dispute it, but you also might not. So then you have the government involvement, because naturally once you have all these, this becomes a communication process. Well, then governments can say that they need access to this information, all this, these messaging back and forth and things people are posting, because for national security, so what starts off people believing it's a great tool for them to speak also becomes a tool for the government to know exactly what opinions people are subscribing to. Now, ideally, government involvement in social media, there's more than one way they could get involved. They could get, on one hand, they could get involved to make sure that the platform is either offering open and free speech to everybody, or stating the cases in which the platform itself notifies the people that their post isn't being distributed, why it isn't being distributed as widely as they might think it should be, and why it's not. At least a full disclosure of the algorithms guiding all these things. Because to see this as a tool of control, think of it like this, because as a platform or as a government overseeing a platform, you could totally eradicate somebody's ability to speak on the forum that most people are subscribing to. With most people involved in social media to some form whatsoever, for somebody's word to really get out who's not at all involved in social media, to become an influencer in the world without participating in social media, is very limited. And if you are participating in social media, but your number of likes is low, your numbers of subscribers is low, this makes it seem like your ideas are not deemed highly among people. But it could be the platform itself that is making the decision, or it could be a government entity telling the platform to make the decision, or the government entity requesting the platform give them power to moderate. These are all things that are somewhat unclear. I've heard some evidence of federal involvement, and it doesn't appear that their involvement is to look out for the people's right to know the rules of the platform, but it seems that they find the tool itself useful towards their intentions within government. So now let's consider the fact that this is not, it is a government, it's a community that people are willing to participate in, and it is a global community. And it does have a government, but it doesn't have clear rules and constitution that we know of. It's a sort of a day-by thing, because it's a new thing, so that's to be expected. But consider the fact that if somebody is made to seem unpopular, it could totally dictate their whole social life, and it can dictate their ability to get a job. It can ultimately decide who reproduces and who doesn't reproduce. It has that much power. And because it's a world thing, we need to think of this government that we're agreeing to participate in as where this government that we live in here in America sets up. Because as we saw with the pandemic, a global rule dictated what happened here in America. And also with climate change, we're seeing that there is global rule, not just national policies at play here. And these are being told to it, we're being informed about this through a platform, a global platform. So we realize that this pyramid of a government that we've built is just basically a small pyramid in the grand scheme of the pyramid of the planet. But the cornerstone that we've put down here, what is to be the center of this government, the center of this government as it raises to the top of the pyramid is supposed to be on liberty. But not all nations are set up like that. So if we are participating in a global ruling, we must realize that we are a far extreme, a radical libertarian bloc. in the grand scheme of things. And that's why we have to understand that the challenges that are coming against our liberties here in America, why they would come, because unless America succumbs to giving up its right to free speech, giving up its right to bear arms, giving up its right to have trial, giving up its right to not be searched without warrant, and giving right to meet your accusers. If people are willing to give up these rights to participate in a global platform, they will effectively find themselves in a global ruling that does not guarantee them the rights that this country originally guaranteed them.